Let's get to the sticky stuff controversy, because you've been somebody who's been willing, if you hear stuff that's not necessarily great news for the sport, to be honest about it and upfront. You talked very early on the steroids. When did you hear about TAC? Was it last year? Was it around a batting cage? Did you read about it? When did you hear about it?
Well, Colin, you got to go back a few years to find out about the whole suntan lotion and rosin combo that was going on.
Yes.
That was probably, I want to go, even maybe 6-7 years ago, started hearing about that. And if you watched the game, you saw guys playing at night with their arms lathered with suntan lotion, and they're going to it after every pitch, right? So that's when I first realized there's something going on here besides just, grabbing the rosin bag and using some sweat or licking your fingers to put something on the baseball. But it was really in the last, I want to say 3 to 4 years that you started seeing ridiculous spin rates, because we started tracking those in 2015. So now we had actual data besides what we were watching to say there's something really interesting, if not fishy, going on here. And then after talking to pitchers, pitching coaches and whatnot, you realize that they're now chasing spin rate more than they're chasing velocity. That was mind-blowing concept to me, because we've always been in love with the radar gun, right? The guy throws hard, he's hard to hit. But they figured out that actually spin rate has a greater effect on limiting hitting than velocity. And now, because they have high-speed cameras, they can figure out all the spin rates and how to generate that to maximum purpose. And that's why I started making these combinations of pine tar, Diet Coke, melting pine tar down, all kinds of scientific things going on to maximize spin rates. And when I say this is going on, Colin, this has been going on even in the minor leagues, systematically in organizations. So I would say the last 2 to 3 years is when I started hearing that this had jumped really from maybe a few guys to something that was industry-wide.
So after the Astros scandal, and of course the steroid scandal predated that, it's pretty obvious that baseball, once this started getting talked about in mainstream media, they jumped on it. You love to figure this out in the off season. It looks aesthetically pretty choppy to frisk guys during a game. The optics are not great. The other day I said I compared it to the NFL catch rule, where guys made catches. They'd go to super slow-mo. The ball would move a little in the elbow crease, and you'd say no catch. It looked really bad. It's obviously a catch. And Roger Goodell had come on my radio show and acknowledged it's bad television. It looks bad. So is it fair to say Manfred was, if you knew about it 3 years ago, other players knew about it probably 3.5 years ago, was baseball reticent to get involved, slow? Because it kind of feels like now they're being reactive in the middle of a season, and kind of it's clunky as they make it up as they go.
Right. But I think you have to rewind the tape here, because go back to preseason 2020, when MLB really did know that there was a lot more than just a few guys doing something to baseball. So they sent out a memo. It was Chris Young at the time, vice president of baseball operations for MLB, to all the clubs, addressed to all the managers and general managers, essentially saying, knock it off. Here's the rule that's in the books. And there is a rule that you can't have it on your possession. Obviously, you can't put it on a baseball. It was a warning to the players to knock it off. But there was really no enforcement to it, right? So behavior is not going to change without enforcement.
Right.
Then this year, they sent another memo out. And they said, oh, and we're also going to have monitors down at the field to see that nothing fishy is going on. We are going to take samples of baseballs out of the game and look at what's on them and figure out what you're putting on baseballs. And we're going to monitor your individual spin rate, because it really shouldn't change that much. Not by going up 300, 400, 500 RPMs is what we've seen. That was another case where MLB is trying to get players to change their behavior on their own. And they didn't. So now they went past the warning phase, the evidentiary phase, to finally the enforcement phase. And they gave them a few weeks here to make the adjustment, right? Because the word went out there early in June. They gave 2 or 3 weeks to say, we're not going to start enforcing this, but here's our time now to start cleaning things up and make the adjustment. So I do not buy the argument that this was dropped on the players out of the blue mid-season. Oh my goodness, we can't change. No, you've been warned for 2 years to knock it off. And it's like your kids disciplining them, right? You threaten them with a curfew, but until you actually do it, it doesn't have any effect. So it took now the enforcement phase to start to change behavior. And I agree with you, Colin. It's not a great look. They're trying to do it as unobtrusively as they can, but there's no other way around it. It is obtrusive, but it needs to be done. There's a certain amount of theater to it, sort of like TSA at the airport. It just has to be done. And there's going to be one time where someone's going to be foolish enough to be caught. But it's more about making sure that now there's an enforcement phase to this, and that changes behavior, not just a warning.
You know, Tom, there's been studies done that the death penalty in America does not curb crime. But that is because, in my opinion, the people that are committing many of the more heinous crimes don't have a lot to lose. Socioeconomically, it's different. But it's different with pro athletes. You're losing millions of dollars, your name and sponsors. So I do think punitive action and suspensions work for the wealthy, for the well-to-do, with people that have a lot to lose. Why doesn't baseball just say, and it's probably a union issue, Tom, you're out for the year? And remember, Tom, in the NBA with COVID, none of the players tested positive, because the peer pressure to screw up your team. There's a lot of peer pressure. Max Scherzer, if the Nats are a playoff team, you're not going to throw your team overboard by using it. Wouldn't just suspensions, intense suspensions, curb this quickly?
Well, the answer to that is yes, but you touched on something. They basically can't do anything without the union's approval, or at least, looping them into what's going on. So the penalty in past years has been 8 games for a relief pitcher, 10 games for a starting pitcher, essentially 2 starts. So the precedent was there that that's what's going to happen once you're found to be doctoring a baseball. So they couldn't really go to, I don't think it couldn't really go to a bigger penalty than that. So they're limited somewhat by the union, but I also think they're counting on, and you kind of touched on this, Colin, the public shame of being caught doctoring a baseball. Think about Michael Pineda. What's the first thing you think about Michael Pineda? Pine tar on the neck, right? And that was 8 years ago. And if you're any kind of a pitcher, whether you're a big name pitcher or a guy just trying to make it in the big leagues, you don't want that stain on your reputation now that they're actually enforcing this. And let's face it, and think about that video if that happens, Colin. If they're the umpires are going through these checks, and all of a sudden it's bingo, we got something here in the glove, in the belt, whatever, that video is going to last forever. So I think the shame of public embarrassment right now is what's stopping pitchers from doing what they had been doing for 3 and 5 years.
Now, I will say this. I mean, DeGrom's stats are insane. He hasn't allowed an earned run in his last 5 starts. There is also something here. We can't just blame tack. And I noticed this about 5 to 6 years ago. The size of the pitchers. There's so many sick. Randy Johnson used to look odd. He was an outlier. Tom, and you know this more than I do, but there's 6'6" guys on every staff, and they're throwing downhill. Some of this to me is these big, tall athletes. Moms don't want them playing football. It's too violent. Many are not, perhaps, super athletes to make the NBA. These 6'6" kids, especially the lefties, they're going into baseball. They're too big for lacrosse, too big for hockey. We have arms now in baseball. They are throwing downhill, Tom. I would make an argument we may have to lower the mound because just simply the makeup of the people pitching now in the last 6-7 years, to me, visually has changed.
No, you're 100% right. There's no doubt about it. The general American population is getting bigger, but especially the elite athletes. And what we've learned now, and this is the first generation that is growing up knowing that we can now teach velocity. When you and I were growing up, there was always that kid who threw hard, and everybody said, oh, man, he's just blessed with a great arm.
Yeah, right? By the way, his name was Mike Polk, and he threw 88 at my Little League game and hit me in the head. Yeah, I remember that guy.
He scared the pants off of you. We all had that guy at Little League, right? And we all said, you know what, he's just blessed with a great arm. It's just a natural thing. Some guys have great arms, some guys don't. But we have found out you actually can teach and instruct velocity. Now, you're not going to take a guy throwing 60 and turn him into 90. But we've seen plenty of cases now with mechanics, cameras, instruction, all this stuff now, high-tech stuff, you can throw harder. So across the board, those big guys you're talking about are maxing out on velo. That's a big part of what's going on here. I think it's the most difficult hitting environment in the history of this game. The numbers actually show that too, but a big part of that is because of the size of the pitchers and what they're throwing. Now, I will tell you this, since the crackdown, or at least let's say June 3rd was when the owners had the meeting to say, we need to really get a handle on the spin rate stuff going on with the sticky substances. Since then, batting average has gone up 9 points. Spin rates have gone down. There's a direct correlation between spin rate and batting average. So part of this was, we need to clean up the game because it's the right thing to do. A big part of it is, man, we got to get some more offense back in this game. On June 3rd, the major league batting average was 236. That is the lowest in history, Colin, lower than 1968 when the game was really at its bottom point. And they had to change the strike zone. They went to expanded playoffs. They brought in the DH in a few years. They lowered the mound. They did anything to try to get offense back in the game. We're getting to that point now. This is just a start in terms of cracking down on spin rate, but there's no doubt you will continue to see offense go up. I'm not sure how much, but it will go up as spin rate goes down.